Hey folks, this is Dr. Emily Scherning with AR, sending you all best wishes for the new year. For this first video of 2023, I want to respond to some of the biggest types of questions I've been getting on this channel, and those are all about climate destinations. This video, we're going to talk about what I'm calling the big three. And I want to frame this right. These three places in America's emerging bioregions are not the only places in the future that do not suck. For many people, I don't actually suggest moving. I suggest building resilience in place because community is your biggest resilience factor. And if you have a good community around you, getting ready where you are is the best plan. You should check out your state level forecast, see how projections are looking, and figure out how to respond to the emerging challenges in your area. But that being said, there are some parts of the country, particularly in areas with high projected water stress, where I do think getting out is not a crazy idea. Quality of life in areas with high projected water stress, there's just so many ways you get squeezed. Many of us are not aware of how much water and power generation are linked, particularly in the West. The other major areas where getting out is worth considering, I'd highlight parts of the Gulf and a few other vulnerable coastal areas like Chesapeake Bay. The degree of projected infrastructure disruption, it just looks really challenging, particularly as we consider changing hurricane pathways. Those will be taking major storms into less prepared areas on the East Coast that are likely to be experiencing simultaneous challenges from sea level rise. So we got a stacked up problem that makes it way harder, right? That means some folks, it does make sense to look for a destination. If you're a person looking for a destination, you want to make sure your destination has some capacity, some ability to handle population growth in a sustainable way. That's why I put together the big three. These are three pretty large areas that have a decent climate outlook, as well as a water outlook that could handle some additional population growth. So here, I'm going to show you this. It is a very ghetto Google slide I made. This is not like our highest quality video ever, guys. I'm really sorry. So check this out. Inland Pacific Northwest is one region to check out. I'll talk more about why I'm not saying to go to the coast in a minute. Northern Midwest. This whole area that is staying in zone 5. These are little snips of projected winter conditions, projected plant hardiness zones. Everything here is pretty good, but these areas are particularly sweet by the lake here. And then as we move east, there's a big swath of territory that's really looking quite nice. We've got two emerging bioregions here, mild winters in the south, in these parts of New York and Pennsylvania, cooler winters, more traditional northern New England preservation as we get farther north. So we're going to go do a little bit of overview work. We're going to talk about how the climate is going to change in each of these places, a little bit on the water outlook, a little bit on their capacity and their culture. And I want you to make sure you consider those capacity and culture issues if you're someone who's thinking about moving rather than digging in. We're going to start in the west and move to the east. So looking at the plant hardiness zone as your sort of biggest indicator of major changes, I want to show you that in the inland Pacific Northwest, look, this is mid-century under 4.5. You can barely tell that it's changing, right? The winter stability there is excellent. Plant hardiness zone is excellent. It's better in Washington than Oregon. Inland in both areas, we're going to see warmer summers, that excellent stability in plant hardiness zone, and tolerable water outlooks. There's less capacity here than in the other two areas we're going to consider. When I say the water outlook here is tolerable, I want to be clear. That's from the perspective of the Western United States, where we do see the biggest water challenges in this century. And because of that water outlook in that context, this is the lowest capacity of the three zones. And the area does have a threat of wildfire, the worst of the three, second worst is in the Midwest, but it also has a lower projected frequency for extreme weather events than in the Pacific Northwest towards the sea. The high frequency of extreme weather events are the biggest threat to the Pacific Northwest by far. It can't be overstated. It's worth noting that the aquifers are doing okay, particularly around the Snake River. That's a highly permeable, highly rechargeable aquifer. As we prepare for decreases in summer precipitation in this region, the groundwater is increasingly important. We do anticipate decreases to snowpack and stream flow in snowpack-fed areas. So looking at other irrigation sources, you want to have a plan for other sources of water. Talking about cities, you're obviously near some big population centers when you're talking about inland Pacific Northwest, but those population centers have pretty decent outlooks and they're investing in climate infrastructure in a big way. all your coastal cities this far north, Seattle to Portland, they have pretty solid baseline climate outlooks in preparation, although there are those threats of multiple stacking extreme events. I don't think those cities are going to experience as much outward pressure as the cities of the East Coast. But I don't think anyone can reasonably say, oh, go to Seattle as a climate destination. The housing market is insane there. As we look at these three emerging regions, we're going to do something that maybe is not scientific, but is definitely useful, and look at Zillow to see what we can get for under 250K. I know 250K is not like a modest budget. Please forgive me. But it's a number that many middle income Americans, many working class Americans can at least reach for. In a lot of the urban environments, 500K is not even a starting point. Like, how can you even reach for it? In Seattle, you can see our 250K housing threshold will get you a scary box that's been for sale for a suspiciously long time, a luxurious 560 square feet. That's not good. If you remove the boundary, there's not a lot more that's going to show up. But if we look inland, I want to show you Kennewick, Washington, which I think is a nice town. If you're thinking about a climate destination, it's got warmer summers projected, excellent winter stability, excellent water availability. You're right in the Snake watershed. And I hear that it's cool. Maybe it's not true. I haven't been there, but I hear that it's cool. And you can see that under the 250K mark, there's both new and existing housing, a variety of homes. And if you remove the boundary, we see that outside of the city and a little bit north here, there's a lot of housing availability. So it's not that I'm saying that the coast is a bad place, right? If you're already there or if you happen to have oodles of cash, sure, move to Seattle. If you want a lower probability of extreme events and you want a chance to actually get your foot in the door, that's why I say inland Pacific Northwest. But let's move east. Let's move at my personal favorite. I know this is going to surprise everyone, the northern Midwest, but I'm going to be honest about the problems to the northern Midwest too. So here we are, we're kind of centered on our prime northern Midwest area. This belt here is your lowest change belt. As you get further north there, the rate of change becomes higher and there's pretty serious emerging wildfire threats. This area is number 2 on the wildfire threat risks, where pretty much here, I'm going to show you in terms of plant hardiness zones. Let's go to RCP 4.5 at mid-century. Watch the blue bands. You see where there's a lot of change there? That big swoop? If there's a big change in the plant hardiness zone, it makes it a lot harder for mature trees to deal with the drier summers that are projected in the area. So what we're going to do in this context is also consider a positive. We can see the retreat of this sort of northern hardwood band here. We also see some retreat of zone 5. Below it, there's zone 6, and that is where fire ants can live. So if you get north of that line, you're out of fire ant territory. Who doesn't want that? The cold winters in the northern Midwest are going to help to keep down invasive pests to a certain degree. Up in the sort of ideal band in central to southern Minnesota across into Wisconsin, you also see some preservation of the cool summer, and you look to be safely above the line where we might see deadly heat waves, where heat and humidity are expected to exceed the wet bulb temperature. The big advantages in this region are the water outlook and the growth capacity. Of the 3 areas we're considering in this video, northern Midwest blows away the other 2 in terms of capacity for growth. The water outlook is excellent. If we take care of the water, big threat is pollution. People are very concerned about it. This area has supported higher populations than it has now. There's a real interest in building resilience in much of the area, and writ broad, I'm not going to say everyone is nice. The area has a reputation for a fairly welcoming culture. It's not as hard to settle in here as some places. And the housing is cool. I'm going to go back over to Zillow, and we're going to look at Green Bay, Wisconsin. I think that Green Bay is an understated hotspot right now for climate migration. It is going to retain pretty cool summers, which is a rare characteristic. The winters are going to be getting conveniently milder. You're on the water. It's like a very moderate Midwestern destination. And you can see that under 250K, there is a lot of housing within the city limits. There's a lot of housing under 250K anywhere, and you can get land. And if we look down here, a lot of this housing is not that busted. You'll see in the coastal publications about how all the Midwestern infrastructure is terrible. They'll never survive climate change there. These are normal houses. This is like a normal brick house. I can tell you most of these houses are insanely solid. Some of them might require work, but this is a great place to get your foot in the door. And if you want land, this is the region where you're going to be able to find land. Heading over to the lakes, though, let's look further east, over across the Great Lakes. Let's look at that third zone of the Big Three, the Northeast, extending down into New York and Pennsylvania. Here, we're not at RCP 4.5, just looking at that winter changes as sort of a baseline for how dramatic are the changes to the climate. At mid-century under RCP 4.5, we've got some major changes. We're going to see some loss of that zone 5, changing to zone 6. Big move of zone 7 up around the lake. Very mild winters coming up around the eastern Great Lakes. Buffalo, that means that you're going to be seeing a shift in your winter precipitation from snow to rain. After this winter, that might be relief to hear, right? Man, that was rough. But so looking here, there's two distinct climatic zones that are emerging that are both nice. You've got sort of this warm lakeland environment here, where you got these mild winters, sort of an emerging Virginia-like climate. And then up in Vermont, New Hampshire, upstate New York, inland Maine, you have some real preservation of a traditional northeastern four seasons climate. Really pretty good all around. Good summer, good winter preservation. The water outlook there is not bad. The wildfire risk is the lowest of the 3 destination zones. If you love forests, this is the one for you. The capacity is not as high as in the Midwest. An additional challenge, it's really close to the biggest population centers that are likely to see the biggest migrations. If we look around, say, the Chesapeake Bay, we have tens, even hundreds of thousands of people whose homes are going to be impacted severely by sea level rise. Same thing as we look in Rhode Island, at Massachusetts. It's very unfortunate. The population pressures here, they're significant. And many of the communities you might consider as a destination, they may already feel kind of taken advantage of as housing prices are being driven up by the urban migration that's already happening. Particularly when you're talking about urban migration that isn't really migration, it's buying a place for weekends and fun and maybe the apocalypse. When you don't actually live in a place or care about enough to build community there, you can see how people might hate that, right? And there's a lot more of that going on in upstate New York than there is in Wisconsin. Let's check out the housing prices over there. We're going to start in Burlington, Vermont, which is just like such a cool climate destination that it's worth talking about anyway. All right, I'm pulling it up. We're moving over. All right, Burlington, Vermont. You can see not a lot of options in town, looking a little more busted than the Midwestern stock. But let's remove the boundary and zoom out, because this whole valley and lake, there is an increased threat of flooding in the mid-century climate, but otherwise the outlook is fantastic. You've got excellent preservation, excellent water table, good indications for forest health, and you can see the commuting distance to decent sized cities on either side of the lake. There are a lot of properties available, and that some of them may need more love than others. Like this one, this is a deal, but you might have to do some things to it. And when I was scrolling down through here before, I saw some other guys who, like, something's wrong there. Yeah, there's problems. And that's not necessarily a problem for you. There's some fixer-uppers, but that means you can fix them up. That's what my family and I did. It can be a way to get the foot in the door. We're not talking about the active horror show commuting distance from these destination cities than we're talking about on the West Coast. You can find equally busted prices, properties outside of Seattle, but they'll be twice the price of these New York properties. It's worth considering it. Summing up, your big threat to the West, it's the level of chaos, of variability due to intersecting natural disasters. The housing inland, it's a workable problem. The water outlook, there's some wiggle room, but the Pacific Northwest inland area, it's the lowest capacity of the 3 destination regions. In the Midwest, the weather is inherently extreme and challenging. It's becoming more so, but the capacity is good, and it's got the best housing and land availability of the 3. Many Midwestern communities want to grow, which is a different attitude than you're likely to see in the West or the East. Out East, your big threat, too many people going to the same places. Right now, there's still some housing availability. A lot of it, you're going to need renovation skills. Some of the smaller communities, they're going to be sick of you before they meet you. Climate-wise, it might be the most pleasant destination of the three for many people with mild winters. The sort of classical Virginia-like climate that's developing down there in the southern part of that region is, many people would like that more than they'd like the Midwest. But I would anticipate that it's going to have the most social pressure, the most migration pressure, and those are factors really worth considering. If you're a person who's been wondering where to go, you need to know there's no perfect place, but there are a lot of good places. These three regions, they all have their ups and downs, but they're all good, strong outlooks. If 2023 is the year you want to make a change, you can start by picking which of the big three suits you, drill down from there. In the next couple of months, I'll be highlighting cities in each of these three regions and their resilience potential, because there is time and there is hope. Let's get ready.